given out that he is man enough to set her free, but God knows if he can do it. And now you know why we are all in grief and sorrow." So when Thursday evening came, Ritter Red led the princess down to the strand, for there it was she was to meet the ogre, and he was to stay by her there and watch. But he wasn't likely to do the ogre much harm, I reckon, for as soon as ever the princess had sat down on the strand, Ritter Red climbed up into a great tree that stood there, and hid himself as well as he could among the boughs. The princess begged and prayed him not to leave her, but Ritter Red turned a deaf ear to her, and all he said was, "'Tis better for one to lose life than for two." That was what Ritter Red said. Meantime Shortshanks went to the kitchen maid and asked her so prettily if he might go down to the strand for a bit. "And what should you take down to the strand?" asked the kitchen maid. "You know you've no business there." "Oh, dear friend," said Shortshanks, "do let me go. I should so like to run down there and play a while with the other children, that I should." "Well, well," said the kitchen maid, "off with you, but don't let me catch you staying there a bit over the time when the brose for supper must be set on the fire and the roast put on the spit, and let me see, when you come back, mind you bring a good armful of wood with you." Yes, Shortshanks would mind all that, so off he ran down to the strand. But just when he reached the spot where the princess sat, what should come but the ogre tearing along in his ship, so that the wind roared and howled after him. He was so tall and stout it was awful to look on him, and he had 5 heads of his own. "Fire and flame!" screamed the ogre. "Fire and flame yourself," said the Shortshanks. "Can you fight?" roared the ogre. "If I can't, I can learn," said Shortshanks. So the ogre struck at him with a great thick iron club which he had in his fist, and the earth and stones flew up 5 yards into the air after the stroke. "My," said Shortshanks, "that was something like a blow, but now you shall see a stroke of mine." Then he grasped the sword he had got from the old crook-backed hag, and cut at the ogre, and away went all his 5 heads flying over the sand. So when the princess saw she was saved, she was so glad that she scarce knew what to do, and she jumped and danced for joy. "Come, lie down and sleep a little in my lap," she said to Shortshanks, and as he slept she threw over him a tinsel robe. Now you must know it wasn't long before Ritter Red crept down from the tree, as soon as he saw there was nothing to fear in the way, and he went up to the princess and threatened her until she promised to say it was he who had saved her life, for if she wouldn't say so, he said he would kill her on the spot. After that he cut out the ogre's lungs and tongue, and wrapped them up in his handkerchief, and so led the princess back to the palace, and whatever honours he had not before, he got then, for the king did not know how to find honour enough for him, and made him sit every day on his right hand at dinner. As for Shortshanks, he went first of all on board the ogre's ship, and took a whole heap of gold and silver rings as large as hoops, and trotted off with them as hard as he could go to the palace. When the kitchen maid set her eyes on all that gold and silver, she was quite scared, and asked him, "But, dear good Shortshanks, wherever did you get all this from?" For she was rather afraid he hadn't come rightly by it. "Oh," answered Shortshanks, "I went home for a bit, and there I found these hoops, which had fallen off some old pails of ours, so I laid hands on them for you, if you must know." Well, when the kitchen maid heard they were for her, she said nothing more about the matter, but thanked Shortshanks, and they were good friends again. The next Thursday evening it was the same story over again. All were in grief and trouble, but Ritter Red said, as he had saved the princess from one ogre, it was hard if he couldn't save her from another, and down he led her to the strand, as brave as a lion. But he didn't do this ogre much harm either, for when the time came that they looked for the ogre, he said, as he had said before, "'Tis better one should lose life than two," and crept up into his tree again. But Shortshanks begged the kitchen maid to let him go down to the strand for a little. "Oh," asked the kitchen maid, "and what business have you down there?" "Dear friend," said Shortshanks, "do pray let me go. I long so to run down and play a while with the other children." Well, the kitchen maid gave him leave to go, but he must promise to be back by the time the roast was turned, and he was to mind and bring a big bundle of wood with him. So Shortshanks had scarce got down to the strand when the ogre came tearing along in his ship, so that the wind howled and roared around him. He was twice as big as the other ogre, and he had 10 heads on his shoulders. "Fire and flame!" screamed the ogre. "Fire and flame yourself!" answered Shortshanks. "Can you fight?" roared the ogre. "If I can't, I can learn," said Shortshanks. Then the ogre struck at him with his iron club. It was even bigger than that which the first ogre had, and the earth and stones flew up 10 yards into the air. "My," said Shortshanks, "that was something like a blow. Now you shall see a stroke of mine." Then he grasped his sword and cut off all the ogre's 10 heads at one blow, and sent them dancing away over the sand. Then the princess again said to him, "Lie down and sleep a little while on my lap." And while Shortshanks lay there, she threw over him a silver robe. But as soon as Ritter Red marked that there was no more danger in the way, he crept down from the tree and threatened the princess till she was forced to give her word, to say it was he who had set her free. After that he cut the lungs and tongue out of the ogre, and wrapped them in his handkerchief, and led the princess back to the palace. Then you may fancy what mirth and joy there was, and the king was at his wits' end to know how to show Ritter Red honour and favour enough. This time, too, Shortshanks took a whole armful of gold and silver rings from the ogre's ship, and when he came back to the palace, the kitchen maid clapped her hands in wonder, asking wherever he got all that gold and silver from. But Shortshanks answered that he had been home a while, and that the hoops had fallen off some old pails, so he had laid his hands on them for his friend the kitchen maid. So when the 3rd Thursday evening came, everything happened as it had happened twice before. The whole palace was hung with black, and all went about mourning and weeping. But Ritter Red said he couldn't see what need they had to be so afraid. He had freed the princess from 2 ogres, and he could very well free her from a 3rd. So he led her down to the strand, but when the time drew near for the ogre to come up, he crept into his tree again and hid himself. The princess begged and prayed, but it was no good, for Ritter Red said again, "'Tis better that one should lose life than 2." That evening, too, Shortshanks begged for leave to go down to the strand. "Oh," said the kitchen maid, "what should take you down there?" But he begged and prayed so that at last he got leave to go, only he had to promise to be back to the kitchen again when the roast was to be turned. So off he went, but he had scarce reached the strand when the ogre came with the wind howling and roaring after him. He was much, much bigger than either of the other 2, and he had 15 heads on his shoulders. "Fire and flame!" roared out the ogre. "Fire and flame yourself!" said Shortshanks. "Can you fight?" screamed the ogre. "If I can't, I can learn," said Shortshanks. "I'll soon teach you!" screamed the ogre, and struck at him with his iron club, so that the earth and stones flew up 15 yards into the air. "My," said Shortshanks, "that was something like a blow, but now you shall see a stroke of mine." As he said that, he grasped his sword and cut off all the ogre's 15 heads at one blow, and sent them all dancing over the sand. So the princess was freed from all the ogres, and she both blessed and thanked Shortshanks for saving her life. "Sleep now